Hello everyone. Good afternoon. If you are in Ohio or in the Dayton area, it's a little rainy this morning, but someone once said that rain is just liquid sunshine. So go ahead and welcome it. We need it all the weather. Hope everyone has had a good morning so far. Got about 17 folks on. We'll give it just another minute and then we'll start our conversation, wrapping up this spring 21-day challenge. Some fantastic partners on the call to help me with this conversation, so I'm grateful. All right. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our Spring 21-Day Racial Justice Challenge wrap-up. Our intention for this time is just to create a space to share out our thoughts, where we are now after the challenge. And to hear any of your thoughts, should you like to share them, please feel free to use the chat and we'll do our best to capture anything there that you lift up. My name is Donna Long and I'm the Director of Advocacy and Outreach here at YWCA Dayton. Founded in 1870, YWCA Dayton is the oldest social service organization supporting women and children in Montgomery and Preble counties. YWCA Dayton is on a mission to eliminate racism, empower women, and promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. We are a champion of women and girls in 3 key ways: direct service programming, community outreach and education, and advocacy and policy support. At YWCA Dayton, we operate the only domestic violence shelters and rape crisis center in Montgomery and Preble counties. We provide affordable housing and support services for women and families who are victims of abuse or experiencing sudden or chronic homelessness. We empower teens to achieve their highest potential through Girls Lead and engage men and boys in preventing violence against women and girls through Amend Together. And we advocate for legislative priorities and address racial justice and civil rights, women's economic empowerment, and women's health and safety. Today, in this hour, we will be wrapping up the Spring 21-Day Racial Justice Challenge. The 21-Day Challenge has been a great opportunity to take a deeper dive into racial equity and social justice. And YWCA Dayton is happy to have helped over 1,200 members of this community participate in this year's challenge. Some of the most pressing social justice issues today, particularly those dealing with issues of race, power, privilege, and leadership, aren't always obvious. Taking just a small part of your day to open our eyes and reflect on these things can make a major impact. So let's get started in today's wrap up. I'm happy to be sitting here with my colleagues, Megan Garrison, YWCA Dayton Sexual Assault Program Director, Nadia Oler, YWCA Dayton Grants and Program Compliance Manager, and Dr. Castell Sweet. She is the Advocacy Committee Chair, and she's also a University of Dayton employee. So let's get started in this conversation. Thanks again, ladies, for being here with me. Just to unwrap, like I said, this is going to be a casual time for us just to connect with, share out any thoughts, anything that rose up in our hearts as we walk through this year's challenge. You know, I know for me, what it brought up in my mind and in my heart, and this being my first challenge, it put me in a space of it expanded my awareness, I think, of all the systemic connectors, all of the spaces where racial inequity shows itself up, because a lot of it, like I said, is invisible, and it broadened my heart in ways that I just had not expected, and it made me really want to rise up to be a greater advocate, a fierce, a more fierce, a fiercer advocate in this space. And it equipped me with the knowledge to do that. So for me, this was, again, being my first time walking through this, this was impactful. It opened my eyes in spaces that, it flipped a switch for me, even in my relationships, where I see things that I never saw them before. And they say once you see something, you can't unsee it. Once you learn it, you can't unlearn it. And so I'm walking daily in my relationships as an advocate. And so for that, I appreciate the challenge. I want to open up the floor to Megan, just to talk about where she is, where she was, what some of the days or whatever day you want to talk about that just kind of expanded you, or sparked something new.
Thank you. So first, I just want to just clarify, I am the sexual assault program educator. So I am not the director, but I thank you for the boost up in the program. For a moment I was like, yes, I will be that position. But
right, I'll take that.
But yes, I am an educator, which means I predominantly do prevention work in my field at YW, which I am completely honored to always just be doing any work with YW. I think the work that we do here is incredibly invaluable in our community. And I'm always just impressed with the amount of women leadership we have in our programs and in our community that we work with daily. And I think for this challenge, I've been here for around 3 years now working with YWCA Dayton. And I've been a member and done a number of 21-day challenges. And I think every year I go into them and I'm kind of like, oh, it might be some repeat of information. It's going to be the same stuff again. And it never is. It's never the same information. It's always up to date. It's new information. It's new angles that I didn't think of before. And even though I work at the YW, where our mission is eliminating racism and empowering women, and I work in the Rape Crisis Center program and the sexual violence program, and I do this work, there's still stuff that I feel like I'm learning just from this challenge. And especially when looking at all of the days in week 2, when we're talking about gender and race and the health inequity that exists within our community, it was things that I'm like, I feel like I should have known in my position, but you're still learning and educating and growing every time you're looking at it. And everything is always very much evolving. And I think of that all the time when we think about women of color in our community, and also how women of color within different gender identities and sexual orientations experience violence. And there's so many different nuances that happen. And we know that women of color, especially Black women in our community, just from my knowledge, working in sexual violence prevalence and prevention, I know that 6 to 10 Black women report being subjected to coercive sexual contact by age 18. That's even before they're considered adults in our nation. And that everyone, that when we talk about reporting sexual violence, that for Black women, for every one that reports, 15 do not. So we know that there's like a discrepancy in the way that there is access for people of color to be able to just access basic needs and just opportunities and services and support even within our own communities. And that's kind of, while I was going through the week, I was looking at my own program and looking at my own actions and my own availability and being like, what am I doing within my own program that is still making it inaccessible to people of color in my own community? Why am I still not making it completely accessible to people who are experiencing this type of violence in my own community? And so that's kind of where I was throughout the whole challenge of learning new things and being like, there is still work that needs to be done. Even if you think you have all the knowledge and all the skill and all the know-how, there's always going to be work to be done. And you have to be dedicated to that work, and you have to continue to be dedicated to that work.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And thank you for that statistic. because, I think it's twofold. I think it's access to report, and then it's the courage to report. And the courage to report that either is imparted and encouraged or not imparted and encouraged in the Black community. So, Dr. Sweet, can we, kind of talk a little bit about that? And I know I'm just kind of throwing this at you because it's interesting. From a cultural expectation, what that looks like and how that feeds into the statistics.
Yeah, so I definitely echo Megan in terms of the challenge, and Donna as well. Just the things that we all need to learn. So all of us, so no matter what race you are, what background you're coming from, there are so many things that we need to learn about work that we still need to do in all of our communities. And so ways that we can do that, particularly for me as a Black woman, to support those in my community and educate those in my community and bring to awareness some of the things that are happening, a lot of the statistics that Megan shared, or a lot of the things that were in the challenge. So how do we do that to raise our own awareness first, but also feed that back into our respective communities? This is not just something for those who are racist that you need to share with your racist friend. Like, this is for all of us.
Yeah.
I've done 3 challenges. And again, I echo Megan here. And every single time I'm learning something new. So for me, that kind of reiterates that this is an ongoing thing. Like, you never arrive. I have so many conversations with people when I go in and do workshops, trainings, or talking about what does it mean to be more inclusive, to be more intercultural, to be more whatever. And how do I know I've made it? I said, you never know you made it.
That's right.
You have to always look at these things, looking at challenges, not necessarily every day, because again, our lives are already consumed with a lot, but checking in regularly. It could be every week, could be every month, could be every quarter, depending on what it looks like. But I do think that's critically important. And again, for us to do this all together, I mean, there's things that we need to do in terms of Black community, people of color, to educate ourselves around these statistics, these issues, these circumstances, these systems. There are those who are men, the things that they need to do to educate themselves, those who are white. So we all need to do the work. It's not just on one party, but us collectively coming together to have a deeper understanding of experiences, and understanding that just because we may be all women here, that we all don't experience our womanhood the exact same. So how can I continue to educate myself on what other women may experience that I personally may not experience? So I just thought that this was critically important for everyone, very universal information that we should all share, all be aware of, keep in mind those good reminders, that things that we probably don't think about every single day, but breaking it down by topic, by issue, by area, in very digestible ways, right? If you have 15 minutes, here's a quick thing. If you have a little bit more time, here's the thing. If you feel like reading, if you feel like listening, if you feel like watching. So making it really accessible, regardless of who you are and where you are, so that we're all doing that work that we need to do to really advance and move forward as a society. I hope that answered your long way around.
And I think that is right, the key, because sometimes understanding or leaning in for understanding can be so daunting, because you feel like that chunking it off has to be, a whole day or a half a day or a workshop, or and providing the increments. And what's so wonderful about that is that when you go to one of the links where it may have a 2-minute, a 5-minute article, or a 5-minute, 10-minute YouTube video, it always takes you deeper. It always brings up another point of interest, another angle, a different look and a different perspective about the topic at hand. And so that's, have been able to gather wealth of information just over these 21 days, just from following the trail from the links. And so that has just been that's been something that I really appreciated about the challenge. We have one question.
I was just gonna jump in. So I was going to jump in about that just to remind you, but
Yeah.
Donna, if you have the answer to that, go for it.
Yep. So Kathleen, yes, yes, and yes. The question here is, do we have modified and a 1 week or bi-monthly challenges for corporations, nonprofit groups, or churches could offer? Yes, we absolutely do. And I would welcome a conversation, and you can reach out to me at dlong@YWCA Dayton, and we can have a conversation. We're in the space of curating experiences based on your company's interest, based on your field of interest, and how equity is important in medical systems, in church conversations, in the religious sector, in nonprofits. So yeah, we're absolutely in that space of curating specific experiences based on what it is that you want. So please reach out. Feel free to reach out to me for that. Great. All right. So I want to talk to Nadia a little bit about kind of your intention going into this challenge, and going in, and kind of where you were when you came out.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started the challenge, this was my third challenge, and I really wanted to set the intention of kind of moving my racial equity lens away from being this afterthought, kind of this step in my process. And so kind of when you take in new information, what you do is you kind of, I don't know, I'm a person who steps away and then I think about it, I digest it, and I gain some thoughts, and then I bring back feedback. And so what I really wanted to be able to grow is my ability to take in information and kind of immediately through my most prominent lens say, okay, but there seems to be some inequity here. There's something weird about this. How do we respond to that immediately versus letting that racial equity lens be a step later on in my process, or a step that we make sure we check off along the way. And so I wanted to work that muscle, build that skill. And I think that that's something that I'm going to have to continue to work on, continue to engage. And so what I tried to really do was look at, how does racial inequality intersect my daily work and my daily life? And then as I was able to kind of take what we learned in the challenge and then use those tools, kind of those research tools that finding resource, kind of like you said, Donna, the links lead to more links, which lead to more links. So I really tried to explore my space, where I work and where I live, and how I could make myself more knowledgeable so that I have that lens. And what I found is, I know it was mentioned in the 21-day challenge, that only 9% of grant funding moves into communities of color. Grants are just underrepresented in communities of color. And I think that that's particularly interesting, because what we also know is that CEOs and leadership positions at foundations are only 10.3% staff of color. And that in direct staff at foundations, it's only 27.3% that are individuals of color. And so what we're looking at is a predominantly white field of grant funders then investing in communities that look like them. And so what does that look like in my day-to-day life as I'm managing our grant portfolio at the YWCA, a Black-led organization who does racial justice work in communities of color? I think what that looks like is me finding a way to intersect racial inequality into everything that I provide to the funders as a form of education to the people who are investing millions and billions of dollars into community every day. And so that's talking about how we know that violence is experienced by Black women fourfold over their white peers. And it's talking about how housing inequality affects communities of color significantly more than white communities. And it's being able to find where racial inequality exists in every one of those areas, and then being able to use that as the sole focus of the grant, or a key component of the grant, rather than an afterthought. And so that's been my focus in the last year. And that was my intention going into this challenge, was to learn how to do that better.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is finding the word. Just a really, I know we keep using the word intentional, way to approach this challenge, because I think that Dr. Sweet, you mentioned it also, but making it personal, and how in it and through it, the output impacts everything, or is affected by everything that we touch every day, our day-to-day scope. And because of course, we can first impact ourselves, and then what we directly touch, our sphere of influence. We want to take on the world in this space, but I think if we make those incremental and impacting and direct changes in our personal space, I think it trickles down. The understanding trickles out and it trickles down. And so I love the way that you approach the challenge, Nadia, and especially in your field. I think I had a conversation with someone when we talk about the field of development and fundraising, and even what that statistic looks like with Black and Brown folks, even in the field, right? And then how do we change that? How do we make it appealing for the Black and Brown students to understand that our community is enriched with philanthropy, and that is a gifting and a natural skill for Black and Brown people, Black and Brown children, to support in philanthropies, in giving and bartering and service, and then how can that be transitioned into a career field? So yeah, but we definitely appreciate that lens and that focus on that lens. So thank you.
I appreciate that, Donna. I appreciate that also, because I think that it's important from a development lens to also recognize that whether you may see statistics about which communities give more, which are more philanthropic, that communities of color are giving in ways that are not always reflected on the tax form.
Mm-hmm.
And so Black communities are giving to each other, they are giving to their churches. And how do we reflect that in the giving sphere to truly show how invested Black communities are in each other and within themselves? And I think that that's important as well, as we talk about specifically the field of development and grant making.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have Megan. You are excellent at guarding the chat. I just appreciate you in that skill. Is there anything here in the chat that we want to share out from those who are engaging?
Yeah, actually, I think that someone recently, and I kind of commented that it was an excellent reflection, is that there are a lot of research that have kind of pointed out that, at least in the prevention field, in the way that we're teaching to young individuals, that we're not actually looking through the lens of like, who exactly are we teaching to? And are we teaching in a lens of what is their cultural identity?
Yeah.
And so someone spoke and they said, as an early childhood education professional, I recently learned about attention. And it's quoted as saying, the quote is, relatively little research has been conducted with children from non-white and non-middle class backgrounds. And so they responded with, this raises a question for me, how then honestly say that the context related to culture matter, and are we actually teaching to the communities we serve? So like, I think that's very true. And especially looking from a prevention lens, that's something we're constantly doing, even when we're talking about needs assessments for prevention work. When we're looking at a community, we're always looking at statistics that maybe are like about crisis line calls or police calls or anything like what is our community needing, without doing full comprehensive needs assessments, like which actual areas in our own local communities are actually the most underserved populations. That we're always working on these theories and or on these really outdated data numbers without doing fuller comprehensive needs assessments and going actually into the communities that we know are not often asked, what are your needs? What do you want from us? What do you need from us? Instead of just being like, well, of course you need this, you need us to do this. Instead of us going there and telling them what they need, that it needs to be, what do you need from us? What is lacking in your community for you to thrive? And that has been definitely one of the biggest issues with a lot of prevention work, predominantly across the nation. And we definitely see this. I see this a lot in sexual violence prevention, is that you have to look at what is the actual needs of the community. What are they asking for? And not just to survive, which is what we've predominantly done, is like, we know that they need certain things to survive, but we don't want communities of color just to survive. We want them to thrive.
Absolutely.
That is the goal.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, let's see. We have Chrissy has a comment here. Okay. We're trying to get to work with some action after the last 21-day challenge. We thought action items represented in the same way as the readings were commitment estimates. This will be helpful for those who just joining the journey and those who are in deeper. Yeah, maybe a 1-day volunteer action event, a 3-day or lifelong action event, a book read. We're going to work with a diversity officer to get this going, and we'd love your input as actionable items to aid in racial equity, social justice, and being anti-racist. Maybe you're already doing this. What organization, where are you, Christy, if you can comment here? So yeah, to that point, you know, I've gone out and we have gone out, okay, we've gone out and had talks with different boards. We've had talks with different organizations or individual wrap-up conversations. And the overarching theme, especially over the past 2 years, has been what we're full with information. What do we do next? How do we stand up our allyship? How do we stand up and become effective activators, effective advocates in this space? So whereas sitting right here, and unless Megan or Nadia have anything specific, sitting right here in this moment, actionable steps that have been documented and curated, we are in the process of building all of those areas out, because like I said, the overarching question is, what do I need to do something with this? How do I mean, we have, through our website where you can sign up to sign up letters for our legislation. That's always a way. Declaring racism as a public health crisis, that's always a way. Sign up to stand against racism, that's always a way. But we know the community in Dayton, Ohio wants boots on the ground action steps. And so we're working together as a team to create those. So Chrissy.
I will say with Sinclair, oh, sorry.
No, you go right ahead.
I will say with Sinclair that we do actually work quite closely with Sinclair in prevention work. Predominantly, we've done sexual violence or power-based violence prevention work. But I definitely think that, I don't know if you're aware of the Green Dot program at Sinclair, but they work very closely with our organization. And I foresee that in the future, there's probably going to be some pretty good actionable partnership items between our offices and theirs in the future. So I definitely think that if you're hoping to be connected, but I love the already ownership of yourself and your community to go out on your own and get that, that's excellent. But I definitely think to keep looking towards stuff, because the prevention efforts at Sinclair, there's some offices, your Green Dot office, the counseling offices at Sinclair have some events already happening that I know of. So definitely share that information and get in contact with them.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, and Chrissy, go ahead and share with us your contact information. All right. Anything else that we want to lift up that was striking? I know I'm always interested in the conversation on biases and ladders of inference, and how we connect with people and why we connect with them. And, Megan, like you were saying, making those assumptions of needs based on your biases, based on your assumptions, and without having those conversations. So checking that always, and then being interested in competencies, being interested in cultural competencies, and not, like I said, using those biases to make assumptions and then create programs and strategies that really are not effective for Black and Brown communities. So conversation and focuses on biases is always something that is major important for me, and I think it's major important for us all.
And I think just to connect that back to Chrissy's question, the actionable, right? If we want to figure out how do we address those, is to get engaged, to have conversations with other people who may not think like us, look like us, experience the world like we do, to get out into the community, to volunteer, right? The YWCA is an amazing organization to volunteer for. I think we may be biased, but I think it's one of the best in Dayton to get engaged, but there's so many other ways and avenues. You can literally take your pick. You can literally pick one of the topics from the 21 days to say, hey, I want to focus on just furthering my understanding and awareness of homelessness. That was one of the days. And so getting involved with one of the organizations who are addressing that, helping serve with them, volunteering with them, that would really take you to the next level of uncovering some biases that you may not even been aware that you held in relation to homelessness. But it really takes you getting out of that space, of getting out of your own comfort zone, your own circle that you kind of used to and experience on the day-to-day, and placing yourself in situations where you can talk across and get to know someone and hear from their perspective what it's like to be a survivor of domestic abuse. We can have our assumptions of what the statistics are and what the statistics mean, but it's going to be a completely different scenario once you hear someone who's gone through that circumstance and gone through that experience. So I really like that idea of taking the things that you're learning or want to know more about or want to address, but then moving into action. Like, then what do I do with that? How do I get to that next step of engaging, of going deeper, of getting some personal experience with working with someone, hearing someone, to figure out where do I fit and finding a better solution for any of the things that the challenge talked about.
Yeah.
I could add, I love what Castell said. And I think kind of what Kathleen has said in the chat, my results weren't too surprising, but weren't totally what I'd hoped for. And I think as you are making those actions to engage with maybe some of those results that you weren't happy for, reaching out to those communities, getting involved in those communities, part of that is also telling someone. Reflecting, being able to move past those biases starts with kind of the same way we talk about anti-racism, is being able to say, as a white woman, I contribute and probably uplift in many ways structures of racism. And I have to actively be anti-racist to not do that. I think that's the same for all of these biases. So tell someone, oh, this was my result. I wasn't satisfied with that. I don't like that I hold this bias. But I'm trying to figure out how to do better about that. Find someone that you can trust with that information. Find someone that you feel comfortable navigating through those biases with, because if you let them just kind of sit with you and try to navigate yourself, then we also don't open ourselves up to letting solving injustice be a community issue that we're all engaged with. And so be open, that way others can be open with you, and then you move through it as a community.
I definitely agree with that. And also another side of that I think is really important, and it's something that I worked through just like over the past couple of years. I don't want to say decades because it makes me feel really old. But I would say that I think one of the things that I worked through is that also coming to terms and like that really self-reflection and like kind of identifying with yourself, those gaps that you have, and being able to like openly like admit to yourself and also admit out loud to others that those are the gaps you have, also starts to bring that down, that defensiveness you have. So when someone of color tells you that you've harmed them in some way, even if it wasn't intentional, that you've made an impact, you're not immediately responding with defensiveness. Instead, you're taking it to understand that that impact meant something, even if it wasn't your intention. And you can instead of being defensive about it, you can instead correct your behavior and move on. Because you don't want to continue to cause more harm by continuing to be defensive and trying to like excuse your behavior. And I think if you start with that self-reflection and start with that being able to build down that defensive layer, you can really start to take away those kind of toxic traits that you've begun, like really embedded in you since you were beginning, especially if you're a person that has the privilege of being white in our society. And so that's really important that you kind of break down that what we consider this white fragility that we have is like breaking it down slowly is really important. But I think also for people of color, I think it's important, especially when we're doing anti-racism work, that they also leave space for themselves. I think it's really important. There's a lot of trauma, a lot of generational trauma. And I think it's really important that we do, even as we're going through this work, we look to people of color to kind of give us the language and the knowledge and stuff, but sometimes that's exhausting. And so think about the people in your life that you're relying on that are people of color that might be exhausted by having to educate you, by having to talk about this, by having to live in this every single day, and give them space, give them a break, give them some time, and let them know that they don't have to be always your speaking piece, but also when they're ready to speak and use their voice, be prepared to listen.
Yes, very well said, Megan.
I think that kind of connects to one of my favorite days out of the challenge was on reparations. I know that is such a controversial topic and conversation, depending on who you talk to. People may gasp when the word is spoken in the room. But I think that for me, kind of embodies what we're talking about here now in terms of that action, right? So that awareness of there was harm that was done, there was something that happened, right? And over time, there's something that was happening. There was a certain type of experience by a group of people, and we need to figure out how do we atone for that. So one of the things that I always kind of get tensed up when people say leveling the playing field, but then yet we don't want to talk about reparations, but that's kind of what that means, right? So if we want to level this proverbial playing field, but we don't want to talk about the redistribution of resources, how do we actually level the playing field? So in order for us to really get to that action, we have to do that self-reflection as a country, as a society, to say this was something that we did incorrectly. We did not share the resources in the way that they needed to be shared. Listening to that experience of those people of color who did not have access to the things that they needed to be full citizens in this country. But then once we get there, now what do we actually do about it? What is that action that follows up behind that? All of the research that was done about how do we figure that out at this stage in our lifetime? How do we figure out what to do, how to address that? And not to say that we can undo all the trauma that's being done, but there are some steps that we can take. But it starts with us having those conversations and getting comfortable having those conversations and admitting that we need to figure out that action that we're taking as part of our system to address these gaps and these inequities that have existed for centuries.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's see. What do we have here? Thank you, Kathleen. All right. Let's see. Megan, you want to take the Haven education? Did you see that?
Yeah, I actually commented on it a little later down. I didn't say what I personally view on it, but I did say that it was important. I think that's an excellent question. I think that working in a rape crisis center at YW, and we also have our DV program that I definitely very much see the lens that Haven education is coming from, that there has been definitely a history within this. And I think when talking about transformative justice and what models, I think there really needs to be kind of a lens of accountability, that we're holding our justice systems to accountability. And I think in the past, it hasn't always been a link that we've had. Rape crisis centers has worked as advocates, or domestic violence centers have worked as advocates through the justice process, but we haven't really held accountable the police officers or the investigators or anyone, really called them into account how they've operated through the entire system. And I think that accountability needs to really be front and center as we're moving forward through this, about how they're treating the clients as they're moving through the system. And then on the other side of that, I think there does need to be a shift of power. For me, and this is, I'm going to go kind of like, I want to just make it clear, this is my personal opinion. I don't want to say this next YWCA day in. I very much think that a lot of the situations that are dealt with within DV and sexual violence could be dealt with responders that are social workers and or counselors, and not necessarily police officers. I do not think that. I think the shift needs to be done to where the first responders are not always police responders to these cases, because we need to have better trained people to handle situations that are nuanced. Or if we can't do that, train our police officers or individuals to be trained to actually deal with the situations and nuances of trauma in regards like this, especially racial justice trauma as well. And so that's a personal opinion. I was just going to make that clear, so I'm not nothing's reflected back on YW in that way. But I do think that it's very important that there's a shift of power in how we're dealing with justice, and also accountability across the board.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Lisa had a comment here. Castell, you want to take a look at that? She says, being a person of color, I must recognize and be ready to address racism within my race, as well as the racism that exists outside of my race.
Yes, Lisa, I wholeheartedly agree. So that's why I feel like the challenge was great, regardless of what color you were, because some of these same things that we need to deal with, in addition to the things that we're experiencing, there are some things that we are also doing to our own people in our own communities, just because we've been socialized in the same white supremacist culture as everyone else, right? So we have picked up on some of those things and those practices that are very harmful to the people we love. A great example of that is, as a board of the YWCA, we are collectively reading through Me and White Supremacy. And so it's pretty similar to the 21-day challenge of There's Days, and each day talks about something different. But there were things in there, right, that I even had to deal with as a Black woman in terms of white supremacy. One of the main things that I had to admit, and I openly admit here with you all, and that I also admit with the other ladies that are on the board, was tone policing, right? Mm-hmm. So my own biases around tone, how particularly Black women show up, and how we police their behavior, their mannerisms, the things that they do in a way that's harmful to them. So I had that kind of aha moment as I was reading that day. It was like, hey, I've done this, right? I've done this to friends. I've done this to people in my family. I'm telling my mom when we're in the store, why are you yelling on the cell phone? You know, so just the things that we do, but we don't recognize how harmful it is and how really it's rooted in white supremacy. So again, we are at the same place of having to deal with this culture of white supremacy, again, that's just embedded into our American culture. It's literally baked into our culture and our society. So we're not exempt from these conversations. I like how Megan pointed out that some of these conversations we do need to have in our own community amongst ourselves, because we need to deal with them. We need to unpack them before bringing in other experiences of other backgrounds and other races. So it goes all ways, right? Having the open conversation across difference, having that conversation within communities. But we all have work to do, and it's all an ongoing journey, regardless of what your identity is and what your experience is. We all need to talk about it, address it, have that self-reflection, and then figure out how do we move forward and kind of undo that harm and atone for some of the harm that we may have been doing intentionally or unintentionally.
Yep. Becky, so thank you for your comment. And yes, it's always about those next steps. What do we do next? So I would encourage you and everyone else on the call to go to ywcadayton.org and connect with the advocacy committee. By doing that, by registering, you will get real-time information about what's next, where are the volunteerism opportunities, how can I get connected? So I definitely encourage you and anyone next to you, anyone that you know, to sign up. Thank you, Megan. All right. Anything else for today's conversation? This has been great.
I just wanted to add, I'm so glad that we brought up me and white supremacy because we're also reading through it as a
Yes,
staff.
we are.
And there, kind of back with what Megan said about white fragility, there is kind of a concept pretty specifically outlined in Me and White Supremacy that is sort of this, you don't get to be angrier than Black people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so as you're navigating through this, if you are white and you are reading some of these truths for the first time, you're learning of this lived experience for the first time, you are probably going to feel angry. You are going to be frustrated. You're going to be upset. You might cry. But that is just a small sliver of what our Black peers and coworkers and teachers are feeling on a daily basis. And so it's so important, if you are white navigating this work for the first time, to recognize that you are going to be overwhelmed with emotion, and that is just so small compared to living this reality day to day. And use that to inform your work moving forward and how you interact in community with that knowledge. So don't rely too heavily, like listen for voice and listen for how the Black community leads in organizing, but don't rely on your Black peers, your coworkers to be your emotional support as you work through this.
Yeah.
Find your own support outside of that, and don't lay your burden of learning about this onto the Black individuals in your life every day.
Yeah.
I just felt like that was an important piece, especially as we talk about moving forward in action items. What does your action steps look like? Not burdening your Black peers with the work as you move through it.
Yeah, yeah. And that emotional burden, there's an accountability piece, but not lifting the weight and carrying the weight of a white person's response to entering into this work, because you run the gamut of emotions, defensiveness, shame, guilt, all of it. And it's not your Black counterpart's responsibility to lift that emotional burden off of you, because then it becomes another burden, right? So
Absolutely.
very well said, Nadia. And if anyone is interested, it is Me and White Supremacy, and you can walk through it with your church group, with your social groups, with your families, and make space for that learning.
And my last tip in terms of that action, I would say, I really encourage everyone to figure out and explore how they can advocate. So every single person can be an advocate, regardless of your background, your experience, your position, your role, and your job. Everyone can be an advocate, but figuring out how and what you want to advocate for. So instead of waiting for someone else to speak up and say, hey, have we thought about listening to the experiences of our other colleagues? Or when someone says something that probably they should not say, speak up and say, hey, maybe you shouldn't say that anymore. So just finding ways that you can advocate through your day-to-day life, and through your roles, your responsibility, your sphere of influence, I think is a really action that's really accessible, that you can do regardless of if it's at work, if it's at home, if it's with your friends or your family. There's always these little small spaces that really can go a long way, even if you just bring up, like, we shouldn't probably think this way or do this or say this, can cause another person to say, oh, you're right, or referring them to books. So maybe you should look into this podcast or look into this thing. So ways that you can just plug into the existing spaces that you're already in to just be an advocate. So finding your way to advocate, I think would go an incredibly long way to helping others along this journey as well.
Yes. Nadia, can you share what you just put in our chat?
Yeah, this is from the last day of the challenge. It is a toolkit that gives you resources to respond to the everyday instances of racism. And so kind of like Castell said, how do you respond in those moments when you hear those things? How do you do that? And this is such a cool resource because it talks through how do you talk to your family? How do you talk to your family in your own house where you can set boundaries? How do you talk to them in their spaces where they set those boundaries? how to respond to an email, how to respond. So it's just really step by step, that probably if you're in a situation, there's a resource or outline in here for how you can respond to that in a way that builds conversation and doesn't shut down or shut the other person down and away from the conversation.
Yes, thank you for dropping that in the chat. All right. Anything else? This was really good. I appreciate you ladies joining me today, and all of you who have who joined in for the conversation to share this space with us. I'll present to the panelists. Anything else before we close? And I'll leave it open a little bit for anyone who wants to capture the link or any other information that's been dropped in our chat.
I'm just excited that I was invited here and talking to all these wonderful humans, and also just sharing in the chat with everyone and hearing how they react to the challenge. It's been so beneficial. I always look forward to the challenge every year, so I definitely love learning from it each time. So I'm glad I got to kind of touch point with everyone about how they're feeling about it afterwards. I'm excited to continue doing the work here for the rest of the year.
Absolutely, absolutely. And to that point, you know, the challenge provides resource and awareness, and the work continues. And we're happy to be here, YWCA Dayton, to provide resources. Thank you for those who called out for the things that you need specifically, so that we can answer that call. And we're happy to be in the space and be experts to be able to do that for our community. So thank you so much. Thank you everybody that participated in this year's challenge. Thank you to my wonderful colleagues who joined me today for this conversation. This is one of the many discussions that we're having here around racial and social justice and equity. So what's next? Visit our website, YWCA Dayton, and you can volunteer to help in our advocacy areas. You can add your name to sign on to the letter to declare racism as a public health crisis. And you can stand against racism and take the pledge at standagainstracism.org. And save the date. We have our next YW discussion on June 17 in connection with Juneteenth. So thank you everybody again for joining us. Have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye. Thanks everybody for all the resources. All right, thank you.